This video is going to be a complete guide for tricep training. We're going to be going over everything from the anatomy, what the triceps do, tips when you're training triceps, the best exercises to do, how to avoid injuries when you're training them, and other stuff as well. So before we get started, my name's Charlie. I'm a bodybuilder, BJJ fighter, level 3 personal trainer. I've over 7 years of experience in the fitness industry and have helped many clients gain muscle, build strength and lose weight. If you're interested in doing any of that or you'd like to learn more, check the links in the description, which will take you to my website with everything I offer on there. Starting with the anatomy of the triceps, hence the name, are consisting of 3 heads: the long head, the medial head and the lateral head. So 2 of them are very similar, one is slightly different. The medial and the lateral head have the exact same function, they're just located in a different place on your arm. So if you just hold your arm out in front of you, your palm facing up, the medial head would be on the inside and the lateral head would be on the outside. And then the long head is in the middle, but it also does slightly cross through your shoulder joint as well. So it has like an extra function as well. All the heads of the tricep are involved in elbow extension, which is essentially taking your arm from a bent position into a straight position. But as I said, the long head does slightly go through the shoulder joint as well, and it's also involved in bringing your arm back behind your body. So now we're going to be going over like the best exercises that you can do when you're training your triceps. As I said, any movement where your arm is going from a bent position into a straight position will be using your triceps when you're doing it. So any sort of like pushing movement, for example, as well as any sort of tricep isolation movement, like a rope push down or skull crusher or something like that, will also be training your triceps. In terms of like the best exercises, you want to select the exercises that use your tricep the most. For example, if you were to be doing like a pushing movement, like a bench press for example, you'd want to, instead of having your hands wider, you want to try and have them closer. As the closer your hands are, the more it will engage your triceps. And when you're doing any sort of isolation movement with your triceps, you generally want to try and get your elbow higher up, as this will place more of a stretch on the long head, which we'll explain in a bit. Also, the best exercises will also be the ones that allow your triceps to go through a full range of motion, so going from a fully straightened position into a fully bent position under tension, as well as allowing you to go into a deep stretch and also putting tension on your tricep in that stretch position. So now we're going to be moving on to some tips when you're training your triceps. So I mentioned this a little bit in the exercises part, but when you are doing any sort of pressing movement, whether that be like a flat barbell bench press or an incline barbell bench press or an overhead press, having your hands closer together will work the triceps more. This also applies to when you're doing things like dumbbell press or any sort of press on the machine. Having your hands in a closer position will work your triceps more. For example, if you were to be doing a dumbbell bench press, instead of coming out with your hands wide, which would be better for your chest, instead you can come down with your hands sort of closer together and more narrow, which will engage your tricep more when you're doing so. Next tip is going to be to try and have your elbow higher when you're doing any sort of isolation movement. As we mentioned with a long head, it goes across the shoulder and is involved in bringing your arm straight back. Therefore, if you can get your arm straight up in front of you, doing the opposite of its function, you'll put it in more of a stretch when you're training it. So examples in this would be if you're doing like a skull crusher, having your elbows a little bit more back to put more of a stretch on it. Or if you're doing any sort of tricep extension on the cable, setting it up so your elbows are higher, maybe doing it like above your head or leaning forward more, just so you get your elbow higher and you therefore put your tricep in a more stretched position. Next tip is going to be specifically for when you're doing any sort of tricep isolation movement, mainly sort of applies to skull crushers, but can also be applied to doing any sort of tricep push down as well. And it's going to be what grip you choose when you're actually doing the movement. So if you were to do like an overhand palms down grip when you're doing any sort of movement, it is good, you'll be able to hold the bar effectively. But what you might find is that your elbows tend to flare out, which would take some of the tension away from your tricep and put it more on like your shoulders and chest. So doing the opposite and gripping it sort of with an underhand grip would allow you to keep your elbows in closer and focus more on the triceps. But the problem is that you can't hold it in that position using a significant weight, as your wrist will be sort of weaker in that position. So the best of both worlds would be to go for a neutral grip, where instead of your palms facing down or up, they face together, as this will allow you to keep your elbows in, therefore keeping the tension on the triceps, and it is also a very strong grip, so you'll be able to use quite a lot of weight when you're doing it. Next tip is going to be in pretty much all cases to try and avoid tricep kickbacks. Reason being, they only allow your triceps to go through half the range of motion, as you can only take your arm from like a half straightened position into a fully straightened position. And if you bend your arm more than 90 degrees, you'll mainly be doing like a hammer curl. You want it to be training your triceps at all when you're doing it. So yeah, in most cases, avoid the tricep kickback. It is still the right exercise, it will develop the triceps, but there are a lot of better alternatives. Next tip is going to be when you're doing sort of any rope push down or push down on the cable, to try and stand closer to it while you're doing so. What this will do is just ensure that there's the most tension in the triceps when they're the most stretched, and the least when they're the most contracted, which is generally in the best case when you're training for hypertrophy and you're trying to like grow your triceps. Okay, and another quick tip for when you're training your triceps is that you can slightly target each of the heads depending on your arm position. So we've already mentioned that the long head will be put on more of a stretch if your elbow's like above your head, but you can also slightly, very slightly target the medial, the inside head, or the lateral head, the one on like the outside, by adjusting that how you rotate your arm and if your elbow's like more out or more in. So if you have your elbows more in, close, when you're doing any tricep exercises and you're straightening your arm, it's going to be doing more of the medial head. Whereas if you have your elbows like more flared out and you're doing the tricep exercise, it'll be doing a little bit more of the lateral head. So again, each head is going to be worked when you're doing that movement of extending your arm. However, you can very slightly target certain areas just to get a little bit more out of them if you ever wanted to do that. Another quick tip when you're training the triceps is that triceps have been shown to be the most type 2 dominant muscle, meaning that they have the most type 2 fibers compared to every other muscle. So they'll probably respond to slightly heavier weights for lower reps. So to implement this in your training, when you're doing your triceps, you might want to go just to that heavier weight, even if you're doing like a few less reps. If you're more like in the range of maybe like 8 to 10, yeah, they will still respond and they will still grow in the high rep ranges. But it's just something you might want to consider if you want to completely optimize your tricep training. Okay, and another quick tip for when you're training your triceps is going to be when you're doing any sort of tricep exercise, you want to try in most cases to keep your elbows where they are, as this will ensure that you're just focusing on using your triceps and not like your shoulders or your back muscles when you're doing it. The general advice would be to keep your elbow at your side and just focus on moving your forearms and your hands. However, this rule can be broken if you're a little bit more advanced. So what you can try is, once you've done your tricep exercise, normally with strict form, keeping your elbow at your side, and as I said, just moving your forearm and your hand. You can slightly use a bit of momentum to actually allow you to lift the weight. And then once your arm's in that straight position, then controlling it exactly how you were previously by keeping your elbow at your side and doing that strict technique. So you can do that just to help you get a few extra reps in the end if you're more advanced, but as a beginner I'd say just keep your elbow at your side and focus on that strict technique to begin with. And last tip is going to be for when you're doing sort of any dip movement and you want to optimize it to work your tricep the most. Try, instead of being slightly leant forward, to try and be almost fully upright, as the more upright you are, the more tension it will put on your triceps, and therefore we'll be working them a lot more. So that's going to conclude all the tips. So just to recap, we've gone over how to target each head differently, how to get the most out of it, how to put your tricep on more of a stretch, and how to train a little bit beyond failure in certain cases. So now we're going to be going over everything to do with avoiding you getting injured when you're training triceps. The first piece of advice when you're training your triceps to avoid getting injured is when you're doing sort of any pressing movement, whether that be a barbell press, dumbbell press, wide grip, close grip, doesn't matter. Whatever pressing variation you're doing, you want to try and keep your shoulder blades back and together, and preferably down as well, as this will just put your shoulders in a more stable position and therefore making exercise a lot safer when you're doing it. Next tip is going to be if you've ever injured your elbow in the past, or you have pains when you're doing sort of any tricep movement, try to stick to pushing movements with a slightly wider grip, which will put less tension on your triceps and a bit more on your chest. As well, not only this will work your tricep less, it will also put less tension on that through the elbow, so it will still allow you to train them to a certain extent. Also try using any sort of elbow sleeves or elbow wraps when you're doing any pressing movement, as this will just help keep the joint and the surrounding areas warm, therefore helping to reduce the chance of you getting injured, as well as it can just help to stabilise everything in there. So bits of equipment like that can be helpful when you've got a minor sort of injury that plays up every now and then, to still allow you to sort of train around it. I'll discuss this a lot more in my book, The 10 Secrets of Fitness, which is a free ebook that contains 10 secrets that anyone can use at any stage in their fitness journey to get the most out of their training, improve their mindset, their motivation, speed up their progress and stuff like that. So that'll be linked in the description. Again, it's completely free, so go check that out. Next tip is to try and avoid flaring your elbows doing any sort of tricep dip movement. So this is normally done on a bench, where your palms would be sort of facing down, with your fingers facing forwards, and you'll be doing it like that. The problem is with that variation is your elbows can flare at some point, So to prevent them flaring, try instead of facing your fingers forward to rotate your hands, your fingers are facing outwards, and this will just reinforce your elbow staying in, therefore making the exercise safer. While we're on the topic of like injuries and like joint pains and stuff like that, we're going to be going over how to deal with like wrist pains and elbow pains when you're training triceps. So say you're recovering from like a slight sprain in your wrist, or you've just done a bit too much for it and you just feel like a little bit fatigued and a little bit like achy and painful within your wrist. What you can try is using wrist wraps whenever you're doing the tricep exercises. So as your wrists and forearms will be slightly used during the tricep exercises to hold your wrist in like a straight position, by using the wraps around your wrist, it'll help to stabilize it, and therefore will ensure that the joints are more protected and stable and warmer, which can help to alleviate if you've got any like slight pains when you'd normally be doing like a rope push down, for example. And then if you ever felt like an elbow pain, specifically on like the inside of your elbow, right on that bony point, this is not always caused by direct tricep work. What in some cases it's caused by is when you're holding onto a bar, say you're doing like any back exercise or like a deadlift or anything like that, where you have to hold onto the weight. And if the bar starts to slightly slip out of your hand, go more from, instead of being in the deep part of your palm, going like more towards your end of your fingers. This can put a lot of strain in the surrounding areas, especially muscle involved in bending the end of your fingers, which is connected to that point of your elbow. Therefore, just ensure if you're doing any sort of exercise where you have to hold onto the bar, either holding on with a tight grip, or using something like chalk, or using wrist wraps, or stopping to like adjust your grip. Again, just to ensure that you're not going into that position when the bar's slipping up towards the end of your fingers. Last tip to avoid getting injured when you're training your triceps is when you're doing sort of any skull crusher movement, especially like with dumbbells, to try and ensure that you lower the dumbbells to the side of your head, and that you don't get in the habit of actually lowering them down like even close to your head, as if you were to like fail the movement or if the dumbbell were to slip, obviously the dumbbell would fall on you and you could get injured doing that. So yeah, just try and get in the habit of having like your hands wide up, always come down to like the side of your head. So that's going to conclude a complete guide to tricep training. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and like. So just before we end the video, I offer both in-person and online personal training. As I mentioned in the beginning, there's links in the description which will take you to my website where you can access that there. So go check that out and I'll see you in a bit.